Hello to wHARTon Center audiences. I'm Bert Goldstein, director of wHARTon Center's Institute for Arts and Creativity, and I'm here with Kelly Stabile-Clark, who is the Institute's Director of Musical Theater Programming, and we are so excited to have two-time Obie Award-winning and Academy Award nominee playwright, screenwriter, José Rivera with us for this afternoon to talk about writing, talk about theater, screenwriting. José, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Good. Welcome back to Michigan State. You were here a couple of years ago for residency. And
I had a really nice time. I really like the place,
Yeah, you were with Department of Theater, Chicano Studies,
Mhm.
a couple other professors on campus. We loved having you here. We hope we can have you back. So before we begin, I do want to thank the Michigan State University Federal Credit Union for their support of these programs and for the tremendous support they give the arts in this community. Thank you to the credit union. So how we met, we've known each other a long time. This is not just a coincidence. For those of you that saw my interview with Tom Hanks a couple of weeks ago, Tom and I talked about where we met at the Great Lakes Shakespeare Festival in Cleveland, Ohio. Well, I'll just say when Jimmy Carter was president. And Saturday Night Live was a new show on TV that we were all watching. Tom and I were interns in that company, and you were too. You had just graduated from Denison University, and you came up because at that point in your career, you were thinking about acting.
That's right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And but shortly after that season, I don't know if it was the season or you decided to dedicate your life to playwriting. So
I realized that I just didn't have that passion for acting that was clear with Tom. That was very clear. The guy was like a shark in the water. You had to keep going forward, and I just didn't have that passion for acting, but I did have it for writing. Right. And it was a pivotal summer for me. Right. And I made the choice and never looked back.
Yeah. But you were writing at that time. You just didn't decide to take up playwriting, that
yeah.
summer. You had been writing in high school, you said.
Yeah, I've been writing in high school, and I had been playwriting in college. So I wrote and directed a play a year when I was an undergraduate.
Great. Well, let me just start with your bio, which is so impressive. And then we'll jump into some questions about your work and craft. So José Rivera's 26 plays have been seen nationally and internationally, translated into a dozen languages. His Obie Award-winning plays, Marisol and References to Salvador Dali Make Me Hot, both produced by the Public Theater in New York City, are taught at universities around the country. Other plays include Cloud Tectonics, Boleros for the Disenchanted, Brain People, Massacre, Sing to Your Children, The Last Book of Homer, and The Adoration of the Old Woman, and of course many others. His screenplay, The Motorcycle Diaries, was nominated for the 2005 Best Adapted Screenplay Oscar, making him the first Puerto Rican writer to be so honored. BAFTA and the WGA awards were also given for that. On the Road is adaptation of the Jack Kerouac book, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, premiered at the 2012 Cannes Film Festival, and Trade was the first film to premiere at the United Nations. Rivera co-directed and produced Erie, Indiana for NBC, was a staff writer on Penny Dreadful's City of Angels for Showtime in 2019. Also in 2019, he produced and directed the short film The Fall of a Sparrow, as well as the world premiere workshop of his play Love Song Imperfect at the 14th Street Y. He has served on the board of Theater Communications Group and the Sundance Institute and mentored at Sundance Screenwriting Labs in Utah, Jordan, and India. He is currently writing all 20 episodes of the TV adaptation of 100 Years of Solitude for Netflix. His most recent play, Your Name Means Dream, was given a reading of the 2020 Sundance Theater Lab. So quite impressive. Congratulations on all the work, on all the honors. Certainly well-deserved.
Thanks, yeah.
You bet. So let's start at the beginning. Very humble roots for you. You grew up in Long Island, and we're not talking about the Hamptons here. You grew up in part of Long Island where, you're in a under-resourced neighborhood, and after college, you did this theater experience in Ohio, but then you came back to New York City to begin to pursue your career as a playwright. And you told me once when we were having a conversation, you were working as a janitor, living in the South Bronx. And living in the South Bronx in the late 1970s was no picnic. But you would work all day and write late into the night. So how did you navigate that struggle as a young writer, and what kept you moving forward?
Yes. Well, first of all, I got to correct one thing. I was a janitor when I was in high school.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and when I was living in the Bronx, I worked in bookstores, and our old friend George McGuire got me a copywriting job.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I mean, it was, it was a thing. I never wanted to have a plan B. I never had something I wanted to settle on doing, and I was really determined to just keep pursuing the writing until I finally broke through. And I remember you were in one of my very first readings in New York, a play called The Paper Rain.
I remember that.
Yeah, really fine cast, really good cast. And yeah, I mean, it was partly a romantic thing. I just fell in love with the romance of being a writer in New York, and I love actors. Having been one, I just wanted to be around them all the time. And it was a dream. It was a dream. I didn't think of myself as like, a Latinx writer or anything like that. I just, wanted to be the best writer I could be. And, I found a lot of encouragement from older writers when I was in New York in my 20s and 30s. And then some institutional problems later on with, most theaters doing mostly white writers, a lot of dead writers. So yeah, it was a struggle, but also I was lucky to have been mentored along the way by some wonderful people, including Vincent Dowling at Great Lakes, and Jack Gilbert, the great playwright who directed my first play, and people like that. So I think of myself as the luckiest guy in show business.
Great. But during that time period too, I mean, your work was getting out there. You were having readings of your plays. You were doing the things that young playwrights typically use as stepping stones to finally get a production of their work, fully staged production. So that was also, I assume, that was happening at that time as well.
That's correct. That's correct. And it was also.
So you weren't sitting in the Bronx by candlelight at night.
I mean, the Bronx is no picnic. Oh boy. But one thing that was different then than today is that there was much more government money available to a young writer like myself. So back in that time, someone like me could apply for a National Endowment for the Arts individual artist grant. And I won 2 of those. And so, Rockefeller Foundation grant, things like that kept me alive. But some of those, unfortunately, are no longer available.
So in one interview, you talked about the storytelling tradition of your family. Your grandparents, you said, were illiterate, so you'd spend a lot of time at the table, exchanging stories, listening to them. And your first early success was a play that was autobiographical, and we're talking about the play In the House of Ramon and Glacia. And I believe the actor Giancarlo Esposito played José Rivera. Is that correct?
That's right, yes.
Okay, and for our audiences, they probably know him from Breaking Bad, and he's done a lot of Spike Lee films, a ton of other work. So it's nice to have that in your legacy, I guess.
Yeah, we're still friends.
Oh, good. I imagine, yeah. So writing about family and their personal journeys jump-started the careers of a lot of writers. You think of O'Neill, Williams, Ethel Fugard. So what is it that writers garner from writing about their families? What do they gain from doing that? And how did that impact your early work?
Yeah, I mean, I think
that play sort of puts you on the map. I mean, it got great reviews. It had an extended run. I think it premiered at Ensemble Studio Theaters where I saw it.
Right,
so,
yeah.
And that was the breakthrough for all intents and purposes.
Oh, absolutely. Without question. That changed my life. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. I mean, I think it goes to authenticity in terms of writing. And, prior to that, I was sort of like, I was a copycat. I was like writing my Ibsen play. I was writing my Sam Shepard play.
Oh, really?
And I was writing my, O'Neill play. And, I just wanted to put on the clothes of these great writers, just try them on. And I actually encourage young writers to do that. I said, it's fine, mimic your heroes, that is great. But it wasn't getting me anywhere. Nobody was producing those plays because they were secondhand. They weren't authentic in that way. And actually, a mutual friend of ours, Vader Russell,
Okay.
said to me, because I was lamenting to her of this problem of being rejected, and she said to me, you once told me a story about how your kitchen when you were growing up was so cold that a stick of butter would be hard on the table every morning. And I said, yeah, I remember saying that. And she said, yeah, well, write about that. Write about the truth of that, how cold the house was, what it was like. And that was the thing that sort of mentally got me thinking, she's right. I think a lot of writers are afraid to go there because what are you going to, you could expose old wounds. You could reveal secrets you don't want to reveal. You may say too much about yourself. But I think it requires a amount of courage to do that. And I think it's important to do that. And I encourage all young writers to, like, as I say often, slay your heroes. Kill Sam Shepard, kill Ibsen, and fully inhabit your own life story. I mean, certainly something August Wilson has done. I mean, it's so many great writers have done that. And so doing that with the House of Ramon Iglesia in 1983, it totally changed my life, and I was able to quit my day job and be a full-time writer.
Wow. So as a writer, then, who are your influences? You mentioned Sam Shepard, Ibsen. Who else?
Yeah. I mean, Lorca is a big influence. Pablo Neruda, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, obviously. Sarah Kane, the great British playwright. Susan Laurie Parks. These people are, I hold in the highest esteem in terms of their craft and their voices. And so I always look to those writers for inspiration. But I also take a lot of inspiration from novelists. David Foster Wallace is someone I've read many times. Thomas Pynchon, Toni Morrison, people like that, who have just a lyrical and passionate relationship to language that I find essential for theater, and that I actually find kind of absent in a lot of theater. So I look to those inspirations.
Yeah. So you wrote in the House of Ramon Iglesia, which was good for your career, in order not to be a one-hit wonder, though, which happens with a lot of writers. They write one play and then they don't seem to be able to get another one. And then along came, there were other plays, I'm sure, but it seemed like the other landmark for you was Marisol, which had its run at the Public Theater, New York Shakespeare Festival. And so that probably took you to another level, I'm assuming.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, what happened was that I got, in a way, sidetracked by the success of the House of Ramon Iglesia, because I was hired by Norman Lear to work on a TV series called AKA Pablo. And I remember, you may not remember this, but I remember you and I had a conversation once when the offer came, and I wasn't sure if I should take it. And you said something like, if you take this job, you'll never have to work again. And I thought, that's very attractive. And it's kind of true.
Or if you turn down this job, I'll take it.
You're right. So I did that for 3 or 4 years. I worked for Norman. And so I did a lot of TV. So in some ways, the playwriting became kind of secondary over that time period. But finally, I did write Marisol. And it was, a lot of ways, inspired by the homeless crisis in New York, and by the fact that my own uncle had died homeless on the streets of San Diego. Because his death and then his funeral, which I attended and was also attended by a lot of his homeless friends, put a face to that issue. And I kept thinking, God, what did he go through? What was life like? What was happening in his mind? And so I wrote Marisol as a way to sort of help me put myself in his place and understand what it was that he was enduring during those years.
And that's had so many productions.
Yeah. That play gets produced like mad. I'm very, very grateful. It was done at the Denver Center, and when it was done at the Denver Center, it was the first Latino play ever produced at the Denver Center. You know, it was done at Berkeley. It was done, you know, in so many places. And to this day continues to be produced. What's funny about the life history of that play is that, like all plays, you know, its popularity goes up and down. So it was highly popular in the early to mid 90s, produced everywhere and internationally. And then it kind of dipped down, wasn't as produced. And then 9/11 happened. And suddenly there were tons more productions.
Right.
And then it kind of died again. And then like Occupy Wall Street happened, more productions, then down, then Trump happened. So it seems to be, you know, unfortunately, a kind of symptom of our wretched political situation that when this play gets produced.
The gift that keeps on giving, huh?
Yeah. And it's been, as you probably know, I mean, very popular at universities and colleges. There's a big cast, a multiracial cast. And so, yeah, it gets a lot. And I actually I really enjoy watching those productions.
Sure.
Because they have a rawness to them, you know, and an honesty to them.
Well, we saw it together at the University of Cincinnati. When I was working in Cincinnati, you came through, they invited you in, and we saw that production together, which was very good.
Yeah, it was very good. It was
really good.
Yeah.
So talk about your process as a playwright then. From the time you get the idea to opening night, you know, how long does it take? Do you stop? Do you start? Do you just plow through it? Do you know, what do you, what's the process?
It's different for every play, but I would say, I mean, the ideas, you know, I'm a sponge for experience, so I'm always listening and watching, and you know, and I'm super nosy, and so, you know, I get a lot of ideas, and then out of like 10 ideas, one will be like the most dominant, and in a kind of Darwinian way, the strong idea eats the weaker ideas. That process of like thinking and sort of reflecting on an idea that alone can take years. So for instance, you know, one night actually, I was driving through LA and I saw a pregnant Latinx hitchhiker in the rain in the heart of LA, and drove past her. And then for about 2 years, I kept wondering about who this woman was. Why was she there? What was her story? What would have happened if I picked her up? And it was 2 years of daydreaming on the idea that finally resulted in the play. So there's that kind of lag in time. But once I commit to a play, I write quickly. So like, for instance, I wrote that play in about 3 weeks in a kind of just fury. And that's very typical. That's very typical of my process. From the time a play is written, God, it could be anything. I mean, some plays unfortunately get stuck in a horrible development loop. We have reading after reading after reading after workshop after workshop, and some plays have a really hard time escaping that.
Let me stop for a second. For audiences that may not be familiar with that process, when you say reading after reading and workshop after workshop, what does that mean? I mean, it doesn't mean you're in front of a big paid audience. Are you in front of professionals? Are you in front of an invited audience? Do you get feedback from that? So is that helpful to you? Some playwrights say it's not helpful, or some say it's very helpful. So what's that workshop reading process? What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So a reading can be as simple as 10 friends in my living room, you know, 10 people I trust, and we read it to each other. Up as far as, you know, I've had readings at like South Coast Rep and Hartford Stage, where the theater invites hundreds of people to listen to a reading. So basically, actors sitting on chairs, script in hand, reading the play out loud to the audience. I mean, both those situations have merit. I only invite people into my home who I really trust and whose opinion means something to me. So when they say something, I really pay attention. The larger readings tend to be more of PR stunts than anything. They give the theater this feeling that they are reaching out to their audience and letting their audience into the process, which for some audiences is a wonderful thing, and I totally applaud it, but it has limited utility for the writer. I mean, and a lot of those readings have feedback sessions, and suddenly you're getting, you know, people reflecting your playback to you who may or may not know what they're talking about. And some can be destructive. I mean, I've heard some terrible negative things at feedback readings. So you have to sort of like understand that you're performing a function in a PR capacity for the theater that you're part of. And that's fine. That's fine. It's part of the game we play. Workshops can be a little more elaborate. I mean, readings, usually there's no rehearsal, or maybe one rehearsal, one read through, and then an audience. But for workshops, and I've had many, you know, you have a group of actors, and over a period of time, a couple of weeks, you rehearse many times. Some of them are even staged. So you have people walking around in kind of primitive blocking. Mm-hmm. So both those situations, you know, the workshop situation I find more helpful. Yeah. Because actors are now grappling, you know, and their response to text tells me a great deal about it. When scenes really click and when they die, you know, so that kind of mirror, mm-hmm. you know, is incredibly useful to me.
Yeah. You're often associated with a style called magic realism. And I don't want to say that's just the José Rivera, but you know, you read and you look at it and you sort of say, yeah, I can see that. So A, is that true? And B, how do you define magic realism, and how does that work as an aspect of your writing?
Yeah, I mean, I fell in love with the books of Gabriel Garcia Marquez early in my life. And, you know, and this goes back to that whole, like, when I was imitating Ibsen time in my life, you know, right. And you're imitating, but there's something missing. And when I read Gabriel Garcia Marquez, I was suddenly hearing the stories that I heard around the kitchen table from my grandparents, you know, ghost stories and love stories, stories of, you know, passion and mysticism and things like that. And that really clicked in me. And then I kind of looked around at the American theater landscape and noticed that nobody was doing something like that, or very few people. You could say King Lear did it. I mean, Shakespeare did it in King Lear when he made the storm scene reflect Lear's inner turmoil. That's magic realism right there. You can say Sam Shepard did it, you know, in Buried Child when he unearths the skeleton of his son. That's magic realism. So some people have dabbled, but I really wanted to sort of seize it and see what I can do, you know, to kind of escape the clutches of Ibsen and the Europeans, and also to escape the clutches of the kitchen sink drama, which I find very, very limited. Kind of, I felt like by the time I was a young writer in the 1980s had run its course. So I felt, oh, this is ripe, fertile, theatrical territory that I can bring my own lived authenticity to. And so I adapted that in a way.
So what is it? I mean, give me an example from one of your plays. I can think of several, but in your own words, give me some examples of your play where we have a moment of magic realism, or a scene or something. Give us an idea.
Yeah, it could be a scene or it could be a condition. So for instance, in Cloud Tectonics, this woman who, I say in the play, lives outside the field of time. She doesn't feel time. Time doesn't affect her. She stays the same age forever. And she's been pregnant for 2 years. So to me, that is magic realism. And the pregnant body is a living, walking clock. You know when someone's at 3 months, you know when someone's at 6 months, and you know, but for her, that clock is absent. So to me, that's the magic of that. And the whole idea in that play is that two people meet and they spend 2 hours together, but 2 years really pass in the outside world. So it's sort of like getting to the idea that, you know, when you're in love, time is subjective. And so to me, it felt like a fitting metaphor to have this pregnant woman be pregnant for 2 years. I mean, that's one example. I mean, in Marisol, you know, Marisol lives a pretty sketchy life in the Bronx. And one night, her guardian angel appears to her, and that already is a little magical.
Right.
And the guardian angel says, well, you know what, I can't guard you anymore because we're having a war with God,
Right.
and you're on your own. And then all hell breaks loose in her life.
Right.
So that to me, those are moments of magic realism.
You also have another pregnancy, but this in Marisol, it's a man who gives birth.
Yes, man gets pregnant. Yeah. In Brain People, a woman has dinner and serves her guests tiger meat, and suddenly they have the tiger's memories in their bodies.
Yeah.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it can go on and on. There's so many other examples, but
Right.
you know, in Love Song Imperfect, my latest play, the U.S. government is so powerful they can rewrite the laws of nature. And a lot of this was in response to Trump.
Right.
And so the US government passes a law that Americans can't die,
Right.
but the rest of the world can. So we go to war with the rest of the world. So what is magic realism? It's taking what the elements of real life and exaggerating them, tweaking them, extending them to the point where you are sort of creating a literal metaphor in your play. Oftentimes, magic realism works best when that quote unquote magic is a reflection of the psychology of the people in the moment.
Okay.
So Lenny and Marisol in Act 1 keeps saying, oh, I want to have a baby, I want to have a baby. It says that to Marisol. We can have a baby and love it so much, is what he says. And then in Act 2, he literally has her baby. You know, so it's like the literalization of metaphor. Right. You know, Sam Shepard does it, and Shakespeare's done it, and you know, Kafka, obviously, you know. Right. Yeah, and what's funny is, you know,
Sarah Rule uses it a lot.
Yeah, you know, and filmmakers, you know, the filmmakers, you know, you do almost any horror or sci-fi movie, you are, you know, tinkering with the elements of magic realism there. Right. I mean, it's funny because I'm working now, as you said in the bio, adapting 100 Years of Solitude for Netflix. So I'm deep in that book. Right. And what's interesting is that, and I always suspected this, the magic in that book is almost secondary. It's very slight. It's 90% realism. It's people getting married. It's people having sex. It's people having babies. It's people going to war. And the magic are like these like extended, beautiful moments of poetry that sort of bubble out of the situations in these people's lives.
Right. Right. You know, and it's interesting too, because for you it's a metaphor, but I'm also, as a audience member or a director, it is powerfully theatrical. Mm-hmm. I mean, you create these wow moments on stage in this, if you can call it a style, but by doing this. So, you know, I've seen Marisol a couple times, and that's just packed with this kind of stuff. And that is one of the things that makes it so impactful and invigorating to watch. You're just like, whoa, what is going on here? And you're trying to figure it out. And yet it's so powerfully theatrical. Mm-hmm. So it's adding so much to an already vibrant text.
Yeah. It seemed to me when I was starting in the 80s that a lot of American theater had descended into this kind of talking heads, you know, kitchen sink realism, right, that in some ways just felt like television on stage. And it wasn't just me. There are a lot of writers of my generation who revolted against that and said, you know what? No, we're gonna reinstate spectacle in the theater. Yeah, we're gonna create, you know, because theater, if you think of theater as like, you know, originally religion, you know, we're going to bring the divine back into the theater. We're going to bring sacrifice and ritual back into the theater. And, you know, so Tony Kushner writes Angels in America, which is, you know, a great example of that. Right. You know, Susan Laurie Parks and her and Venus, you know, so many of her great plays. Right. Even someone like Mac Wellman, you know. So there's a lot of, I think my generation really got sick of how theater became smaller and smaller, and like just decided we need to like explode this form if we can. Yeah.
So you once said when you were a young writer starting out, sitting in the rehearsal hall with directors and actors, you didn't really know how to handle it. You know, you didn't know what to say or what to do. Now that you're an accomplished writer, you've been sitting in rehearsal halls for thousands of hours. What do you know now about working with actors, directors, and designers that you didn't know when you were 22?
Yeah, yeah. Um, and remember, I didn't go to grad school, so I think some of the things that I would have learned in grad school, I had to sort of learn on my own, and that was one of them. How do I behave in rehearsal room? Yeah, I mean, I learned that as a playwright, I have far more authority than I thought I did. That in some ways I know more about the play than anyone else in the room. And it's a process of like letting knowledge go so that they know as much, if not more, than I do. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that was my role. I thought I had to be super protective of the work, and that's not really the right attitude. The attitude is like, we are all collaborators and we are there not to fix the play, but to solve the play. Mm-hmm. And that is something I didn't know, I learned I didn't have to be satisfied with mediocrity. If I was not happy with an actor, they could be fired. The same is true of a director. I don't like to do that, and I've done it very, very infrequently. But it is something that is something I learned over the years.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I also learned that I don't have to listen to everybody. I don't have to chase solutions to the play. I can let them come organically. I can take my time. Mm-hmm. The worst writing I've ever done, were those times where I felt I had to solve a problem in rehearsal for tomorrow's rehearsal.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah.
That's pretty common if you've been commissioned or you're working on a piece. They'll say, Jose, you got to go to your hotel room tonight and fix this scene.
Yeah, yeah. See, I think that's dreadful. I just don't think that's productive. I mean, it's good to know that there's a problem, but I mean, time is the best friend of writing, and you need the time, even in that period. And sometimes you say, well, you know what? We're going to open, and this act 2 is not going to be solved. I'll have the opportunity later on. Right. You have to take the long view in theater. You can't. It's not television. Yeah. It's not, we need to do this in 7 days or we're screwed, So I learned those kinds of things.
So in this, thinking about this question though, real quickly, do you prefer being commissioned, which means a theater will come to you and say, Jose, we want you to write a play, or do you prefer just writing on your own, then submitting it and looking where someone might produce it?
Yeah, I mean, I think a commission without the promise of a production is empty. And those are not often. I mean, most commissions, they commission you with no strings attached. Mm-hmm. In some ways, that's liberating. But on the other hand, I've had commissions like South Coast Rep. I love those people, don't get me wrong. But they commissioned 3 plays of mine in a row and didn't do any of them.
Wow.
And then when the 4th commission came, I just turned it down. I said, look, I'm never going to get produced at your theater. What is the point of this? Yeah. It just feels like empty theatrics. Right. So that kind of thing can be troubling. I have a rule, which is I write movies for money and I write plays for love. Right. So I like to keep the money part out of the plays as much as I can. Yeah. And the commissions are not that much. I mean, and also I'm at a point in my life where commission's not going to change my life. I always say, give it to a 19-year-old, give it to a 20-year-old, that it will change their lives, because what a commission does, the money is okay, but what it really does is validate you. It says, we give you this, good house seal of approval. And that's what commissions are really for.
When you're commissioned, do they say, we'd like you to write this story? Or do they say, you have a commission, write whatever you want?
Yeah, usually it's write whatever you want. Right. The exception was, for instance, I was commissioned by Hartford Stage to adapt 100 Years. Life is a Dream.
Oh,
the Calderon play. Yeah, so I wrote a play called Sueño, which is my adaptation.
Yeah, I started reading it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fun play. I love that play. Yeah. Calderon's play. So that was a case where I was specifically asked to write, and I accepted that. I said, great, I've never done an adaptation before, and I love Calderon, and here we go. But most times it's like, yeah, do whatever you want.
Okay. So you've had tremendous success both on stage and on screen. You got an Academy Award nomination for the Motorcycle Diaries. And I remember when you were here at Michigan State, you talked about that project, what it meant to you personally, how it came about. Take a few minutes to tell us about Motorcycle Diaries, being on set with the director who you really loved. You absolutely loved working with the actors. Great experience for you all around. So what was that like? How did it come about? What happened?
Yeah. Just to give it context, it occurred after I literally spent 14 years writing screenplays that were never produced.
You told me that, yeah, I remember.
Yeah. So I just became this guy who collected checks for things no one ever saw.
Yeah.
So everything about Motorcycle from the very beginning was different for me. Starting with the fact that when Walter put out the word that he was looking for a writer, every agency in
Walter
Salles,
okay.
the Brazilian director, directed Central Station, which was Oscar-nominated film.
Great.
Brilliant director and great guy. But anyway, when Walter put out the word, every agency in LA sent him their client scripts. We had a stack of scripts, and he didn't feel like reading any of them. So he gave the scripts to his assistant, Eileen, and she read them all. And he said, so is there anything good in that pile? And she said, not really. Well, wait, there's this one screenplay. And it was a screenplay I had written called Lucky, about a man. It's just like Benjamin Button. It's about a man who's born old and gets younger, and the woman that he falls in love with. And Walter read it, loved it, and then we met for lunch. And, we hardly talked about the movie. We just talked about our lives. And it was clear, even though his upbringing was very different from mine, like his father had been an ambassador to France and an ambassador to the United States. My dad was a janitor. So we had very different upbringings, but we clicked on art and, movies, and we both love vendors. I mean, so many things. And so by the time dessert came, he'd offered me the job. So I wrote the script, and, I spent months and months researching, and went to UCLA to watch old footage of Che Guevara, and, read everything I could get my hands on, wrote the first draft, and he really, really loved it. And we were working at the time for Robert Redford. So Redford and his people loved it. And then one day, the most amazing thing happened. He said, you know what, we're making this movie. And I was stunned. I'd never heard those words. And I said, you mean with actors and a camera? Actors and a camera. And so, and then, he invited me to go to Argentina. Once the leads were cast, I went down to Argentina, and we did a process very similar to theater, which is the actors would have readings of the screenplay during the day, because so much of the screenplay is just two characters. And then we would talk, and then I would go and do some rewrites, come back, they would do the scenes, and this went back and forth for several weeks. So it was a really great experience. And it felt like something I knew how to do from theater. And so, and it really, I think it, someone once said that most screenplays are 85% done, and that's it. So I think we went from 85% to 95% done after that process, because the actors helped me sort of deepen the dialogue. Also, one of the actors, Rodrigo de la Serna, who's actually a relative of Che Guevara, is from Argentina. So he knew that slang in a way that I didn't know.
Okay.
So that was incredibly helpful. And then, Walter went off and shot the film. And, it was a great experience. A lot of that time I was back in the States. So I would get a call from Walter at 3 a.m, like in Peru, saying, Gael's having trouble with this speech, and Gael's having trouble with this scene. And we would talk it through. And sometimes standing there on the spot, I would rewrite it for him.
Oh my God.
So yeah, it was intense. It was intense. So that, when the movie came out, the final sort of contribution I made was, the producers hired a subtitling company to do the subtitles in English. And Walter and I watched it, and we were both like appalled at how poor and anemic the subtitles were. And I said to Walter, look, don't pay me, don't even tell my agent, I'll do it for free. Please let me rewrite all the subtitles.
Yeah.
So he did, and I did. And so I think that actually really made a difference for an American and English speaking audiences. And then, you know, I would be at a party or something and someone would hint, oh, I hear you might be getting good news. And like, oh, okay. And then, yeah, one morning at 6 in the morning, I get a phone call and, you know, it was about the nomination and it was being announced. And all, you know, I spent so many hours on the phone fielding calls from friends. Yeah, so that was really unexpected. Though I think the real breakthrough for the film came at Sundance, because it was so wildly embraced at the Sundance Film Festival. Like I liked the film when I had seen it was just me and Walter. I didn't really understand like its emotional power until I sat in an audience of 1,000 people, you know, and that night we sold it to Focus Features and the rest is history.
We're running out of time, and I'm sorry to ask you. Some people might say we're in an era now that's been really favorable to African American writers, particularly African American female playwrights, women playwrights. Katori Hall, you mentioned Lynn Nottage, Dominic Morrisseau. Are you seeing a similar kind of progress for Hispanic playwrights?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to tell, and I don't think statistics exist. But yeah. I mean, I've done some mentoring in certain places with some wonderful Latin writers. And you know, one comes to mind quickly is Frankie Gonzalez.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
specifically for playwriting or
playwriting.
Playwriting.
For playwriting, yeah, for playwriting, yeah. I think it's a good moment for writers of color of all kinds, you know, Arab American writers as well. You know, I think it's a good moment because I feel like it's like one of these times when the country is sort of like looking at itself in a mirror and saying, you know what, we haven't done well by some of our citizens, and we need to do better, and that's in everything, including the arts. And I think we're in that kind of moment right now, and you know, I just think it is going to get better and better. And when I think back, God, 1983, when I had my first play produced, you know, I couldn't even find enough Latin actors to cast my first play. You know, and now, my God, it's incredible how many really trained and smart and motivated Latin actors there are, getting degrees from Yale and Juilliard and all kinds of great places. So yeah, I feel a lot of you know, a lot of encouragement, though it's kind of ironic because it's sort of like, well, because I do a lot of mentoring. It's like, oh, you know what? I'm just mentoring my competition.
Yeah. All about Eva.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I feel like, oh, I'm just, you know, I'm arming the writer that will take my commissions away from me.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah, but it's fine. You know, I benefited so much from older writers who were generous to me.
Yeah.
You know, so I can't not be generous in return.
Right. So here's sort of a out of left field question. You can answer it or not answer it if you want. But what's a question you wish someone had always asked you and never did? Because you've been interviewed so many times. And I'm trying to think of, is there a question you said, you know, I wish they'd asked me about this when I was talking to them about my work?
Yeah, I guess the question would be, just because it would make me think a little bit, would be like, how do you balance art and family?
How do you balance art and family?
Why did you have to ask me that? God damn it. Oh, I thought it was the question you never wanted to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a tricky balance. It's a tricky balance. And I always say to people, one of the biggest factors in your success as a writer is picking the correct spouse. Because that person, you know, will either clip your wings or let you fly. And it's really important. You know, the great thing about having kids is, for me especially as a writer, is that they keep you grounded and they keep it real. And I remember thinking, before I had children, I would write whatever. I said, I don't give a fuck. I don't care how crazy, nutty it was. but after having kids, I thought, you know what, someday we're going to have like this precocious 16-year-old opinionated teenage girl reading my plays and judging the hell out of me. And
Right.
so I better step up.
Right.
My plays got better when I had children. And I don't know if it was Tolstoy, someone said they really didn't understand human nature until they had children. And, you know, watching my kids turn from tadpoles into humans, you know, I learned so much about human nature and what we do, why we do what we do.
Yeah.
And so I think that balance, it's achievable. It's achievable. The good news is you can have a family and you can be an artist. You know, sometimes people think, oh shit, I can't do both, you know.
Right. Yeah, I did an interview for someone the other day and I talked about that, you know, I was able to find that balance, be in the business, make a living and still have a kid.
Yeah.
Because I think my life would have been devoid without one, you know, despite the work. And I had to make some compromises, but, you know, I still was able to do this. One last question. We're on a college campus. Hopefully we'll have young writers somewhere watching. You say you do a lot of mentoring. So what's Jose Rivera's advice to up and coming playwrights?
I think a lot of it has to do with time. I think I urge patience with young writers. I urge don't impose arbitrary deadlines on yourself and say, I must get my first play produced by the time I'm 25. It must be in a regional theater by the time I'm 30. It must be on Broadway by the time I'm 35. I mean, there's a lot of nonsense with that. And I think you have to think of writing as a lifelong endeavor. In some ways, it's a lifelong apprenticeship because you'll never know it all. You know, it's impossible. And writing is bigger than all of us. So I would say to a young writer, yeah, be patient with yourself. Going back to the thing about family, have a life. You know, don't be a theater martyr. Don't be a martyr to art. Be incredibly generous and grateful to the people who help you, because there will be the people that will help you, that want to help you. And remember them and be good to them. You know, I would say be really honest with yourself, know your limitations as a writer, know what you can or can't do. I know, for instance, I can't write Spider-Man 4. It will never happen. And no one will ever hire me to do it anyway. You know, I can't write Die Hard movies. There's just so many things I cannot do. So you concentrate on things you know how to do and do it better than anyone else, you know? Yeah. Be realistic, be patient. You know, when you have money, save your money, you know, because you know, a theater career or arts career it's a roller coaster financially. Sometimes you have it, sometimes you don't. You just got to, you know, be frugal when even when you have it, you know. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it has to do with like cultivating relationships with people so that you don't stab your best friend in the back, you don't steal your neighbor's idea, those kinds of things. Live an honorable life. Live a life that you can be proud of. You know, don't be a son of a bitch. And you know, cultivate your appetite. Like read intensely, go to art galleries, read poetry, listen to music. You know, constantly feed the instrument so that you know you don't run out. It's really, really important.
Yeah.
Know your theater history. Like if you're gonna be a playwright, know who Ibsen was and know who Calderon was and what that meant, you know, in the history of the profession. You know, be conversant in your art form. I think is really important.
Yeah.
And I guess lastly, I would say curate a group of artists that you can work with time and time again, that believe in you, will go to the mat for you, will be honest with you, whether they're directors or other writers or playwrights and actors, you know, that you have around you, you know, like-minded spirits who get you and you get them, because you'll do great work that way. And so many great companies, you know, the Living Theater and Bread and Puppet and Circle Rep, you know, that they were formed, Steppenwolf, out of that kind of collective.
José Rivera, thank you so much for again coming back to Michigan State and the wHARTon Center. It was so great to have you. Best of luck with everything. We look forward to seeing more of your work on stage and on TV and in films. And again, thank you so much. And we will hopefully see you soon. We have to have you back to Michigan State when things open up again.
I would love that.
Okay.
I would really love that. Yeah.
All right. So next up, I'm going to be speaking to Franny Shepard Bates from the Detroit Public Theater. She runs an amazing program called Shakespeare in Prisons, where it's exactly what that is. She goes into a men's prison and a women's prison in Michigan, and they produce the plays of William Shakespeare. It's a very cathartic experience for the inmates who are working on this. So Franny will be with us in December, and she'll have two guests, people who are with the program who have since left the prison population and now out in the general world. And they will talk about the impact that Shakespeare had on helping them not only sustain prison life, but also change them in some ways. So it's an amazing program. That's Franny Shepard Bates and the Shakespeare in Prison program. I'll be talking to her next. Kelly, what else do we have going on virtually at wHARTon Center?
We are about to wrap up our fall session of our wHARTon at Home classes. They've been really successful for people ages birth to adults, and we will be starting a new session of those after the new year, so make sure to follow us on social media, check our website, or join our e-club and get all those updates. We will have our next round of Take It From the Top virtual intensives the second week of December, and that's going to be about dancing. Make sure to check our website for information on all of those. They happen once a month, and we're just excited to be able to work virtually and keep arts in our community and keep connecting with all of you.
And once again, we want to thank the Michigan State University Federal Credit Union for their support of these programs and everything they do for the arts in our community. Until then, stay healthy and we'll see you soon. Take care.